I'm Darren, this is my neighbourhood. This is Princess Avenue in Hull. Did in its day have a reputation for being probably the coolest street in Hull. It was a really good traditional mix of traditional shops. There was a butcher's that's still here behind me that is very traditional, so well regarded that a lot of the top chefs in Hull still buy a lot of their meat from there. It has, on the more hippie side, there's a community arts centre just to my right over here that's been here since the mid-80s. The reason why it was a great shopping centre and a great centre to come was because it's close enough to the university that there were some of the coolest students, so far enough away from the university that quite a lot of the cooler lecturers and ex-students still live here. There are 4 or 5 avenues of really large Edwardian houses, and then there are another 4 or 5 rows of terraced houses, which is where I live. So when I first came in the 80s, the supermarket over here on my right was a local supermarket. I can't swear to the quality of the veg there. I don't remember buying veg there, but what I will say is that when I arrived in the mid-80s, it had only just stopped selling margarine made from whale blubber. So it kind of gives you an indication of what the food quality was like in the supermarkets, and I'm sure it's got a lot better now. But what there was a traditional greengrocers about halfway down the street. And I think just before I arrived, there was actually a co-op as well, and they were always had a reputation for better quality food because part of their remit was to bring wholesome food here. But a really mixed centre, so there was 1 or 2 record shops. There was a stamp shop that my wife used to really love going into, apparently. There was an Indian and continental store, which is still here, which was the only place to buy anything that was exotic. Wasn't great for veg though. What I used to find was that if you didn't go in there on a Thursday evening, then the veg would have all the good veg would have been sold. Everybody went in at 6, 7 o'clock on an evening, on a Thursday evening, and bought all their veg from there. But we had a good veg shop. We also had an independent book shop. We had a whole food shop here. We had a shop that sold magic supplies, and we had a shop that was basically an anarchist shop. So in its heyday, this was probably one of the few streets in the north where in 3 distinct shops you could buy a copy of the I Ching. Things changed a lot towards the end of the 80s and then into the 90s especially. It started to lose its momentum. So a lot of the shops closed down. A lot of the shops that tried to open here didn't survive very long. A lot of the cooler shops moved a few blocks down really to Newland Avenue, which is still a really great shopping centre. Has 3 or 4 veg shops in there, as well as a couple of good butchers. That great mix of bookshops and cafes and the kind of things that keep it cool, but also lots of traditional shops there as well, a proper mix and a lot of energy. But it's like the area couldn't support 2 streets like that, and this one lost out. It started to die economically, but then someone opened quite a cool bar, and that was really good. It was sold decent coffee. It was one of the first places to sell coffee that was actually drinkable in Hull. Sold nice beers, one of the first places to sell nice beers, and it created a renaissance for the place. So now there are plenty of bars here, plenty of restaurants have come on the back of that. The downside is, with the exception of one express supermarket, there's nowhere really to buy food anymore. It's really great if you want to go out and get a craft beer. It's really great if you want to go out on a Saturday or Sunday night. Sometimes has a reputation for being a little bit rough. It kind of trades off its cool reputation, but then it lost that a little bit once it became a place where it was like a drinking run, basically. So the bars had a veneer of sophistication. However, there are still some really cool bars here, some of my favourite bars to go drinking here. So we're leaving Princess Avenue now and we're going towards town. Hull's got a weird geographical and economic Hull has some weird economic and geographical idiosyncrasies, which means it doesn't really have much of what we'd call an inner city. This is probably one of the few areas that would count as an inner city. And most of the places you would expect to have an inner city vibe are actually on the outskirts of what is in effect quite a small city anyway. So this area, around the same time, it was down on its uppers. This is Springbank, and it had a few interesting, shall we say, legacy shops and places. There are some very traditional ones. The Deaf Centre's here, the Bridge Club is here. There was a really good music shop. One of the coolest pubs in Hull is on here, and there used to be a couple of pubs on here, but as an economic centre, it really suffered. I think partly because this is quite a poor area. It's on a run into town. So there was always quite a few takeaways here. But no veg shops, no fresh food shops. But then things started to change. Hull, because of its out-of-the-wayness, was quite an isolated place. Very monocultural, very white in a lot of ways. Despite being a port town, despite being one of the main centres of Jewish migration across Europe, most of the Jewish population that stayed here stayed because they died on their way to, at the very least, Manchester, but mostly America. Then things changed. This is a place where originally Kosovan refugees came, and then thanks to a few international adventures from our government and the American government, we had Kurdish refugees. Then we had people from such a diverse set of areas, a set of countries, that I won't go into it. I work in a couple of the schools around here, and the number of countries is almost too many to mention, and we're talking maybe 75% of the population of the schools are from families who speak English as a second language, and it has made a huge difference. So this was a place where you couldn't buy fresh food. You could probably buy more food here at 10:30 at night and 2 in the morning than you could during normal shopping hours. But now it's changed massively. We've now got to my local veg stop, and it is completely different. Different to anything we had in Hull. Fresh fruit and veg in vast quantities, not all exotic like the Indian and continental. The prices are much better. There's 3 here, just in one block, and the prices can vary quite a lot as well, in a positive sense. If you don't have a time constraint, if you can cook out, if you've got a big family, or you can come every day, you can buy food that really needs to be used in the next 2 or 3 days. If you've got more money to spend, or you've got more time on your hands, or maybe you're more time poor, so you have to buy a big shop, you can spend a little bit more money and find food that will last longer, and the prices reflect that. Grocery stores, and we call them grocery stores here have a massive vegetable section. I mean, really big, as big as most greengrocers, sitting out the front, as well as all the really interesting food inside. So I've kind of come to the end of my run here, so I'm going to turn around, but like just up the road there's another store that is very similar. There are a couple of express supermarkets here as well, quite expensive. When I first came to Hull, and until relatively recently, I mean well into my main street, Princess Avenue, having nowhere to buy food. This place was a bit of a desert. It really struggled maybe there was the odd really cool cafe actually that tried to open, didn't last very long. Most of the pubs that were really good pubs here shut down. In fact, all of them, one of them is just reopening now as a cooperative. So all of this area was a veg desert, with the exception of what you can get in the supermarkets. And yeah, I think probably the quality is better nowadays, but still not a lot of stuff to buy in the supermarkets. And it just feels sometimes like it's a lot cheaper to buy something that's a ready meal when you're comparing what's in a supermarket. For me, this is fantastic. I can walk down here, just crossing the road, buy enough veg to last for the week, wheel it back home again. And occasionally meet some of my pupils down here as well, which is really nice. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a barrier here. The barrier is, this is out of a lot of people's ken. They're much more comfortable now going into a supermarket than they are going into a specialist food shop. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the supermarket was the exotic place. The idea that you went around filling your basket with, or your trolley with food, and you didn't pay for it as you got it, and then you went to a checkout, probably felt quite exotic. And for some older people, some more traditional people, it might have seemed really awkward. But eventually we got used to supermarkets, and then proper grocery stores became a very rare thing. We had one in Hull, believe it or not, till 1998, I think. The guy finally retired, but he was very traditional, and that felt quite awkward at the time when we were going in there as students or in there to do our local family shopping. He was somebody who would really upsell, I mean really seriously upsell. Quite often my friends went in there with however much money they had in their pocket, they'd have none left when they came out again, but they'd have some fantastic stuff. They'd have like some fruit mix and some exotic snacks and some things that they're definitely not intended to spend money on. He would love you to have an account with him. He was somebody who used to give you a proper grocer's account like it was still the 1930s or the 1940s. But for a lot of people down here that are white working class, which is what this area really is or was, it must feel really unusual. When I go in there, quite often there are only 2 or 3 people that are going shopping in there, and that are white, and you could tell there are people that are probably a bit more adventurous, shall we say. Very rarely do I see people that look like I would normally see in the local supermarkets shopping in there. And that makes me wonder what we can do to kind of solve that. There was a time when we tried to create social cohesion, which is what it's about. There's a load of shops there that are being really well used by a certain group in the population, but not by a lot of others. And there must be a reason for that. And I think part of it is that we don't spend the money on social cohesion that we did. There was a time that we would have, at least once a year, shut down that main street, had a massive street party, and had a load of community groups in there. Have a few rides, have someone like me running a samba workshop or a music workshop or a music building, instrument building workshop, and lots of other things. And then get people going into the shops or coming to the shops and getting them sharing their culture, getting them mixing with the rest of the community that feels like they're maybe barred or feel a barrier to going in there. So there you go, this is my neighbourhood. It's gone from being the coolest centre that was a mixture of the hip and the traditional to somewhere which is a kind of mix of the sophisticated and the faux sophisticated. It's somewhere where it is really great to go out on an evening or to sit on a summer's afternoon drinking, but it's not somewhere to go and buy fruit and veg anymore. But then something happened around the corner. Thankfully, an area that was really economically struggling was revitalised by a community that came in that values the ability to have access to good, cheap fruit and veg.